The stagecoach wheels stopped turning, and I knew my life was over. Dust kicked up around my black morning dress. The driver, he didn't even look at me, just tossed my little bag on the ground next to a wooden sign that said Fort Kearny, population 847. This is as far as your ticket takes you, ma'am. His voice wasn't mean, but it sure wasn't kind. The coach rolled away, leaving me alone under the big empty Nebraska sky. My sister's words still echoed in my ears. We can't feed another mouth, Catherine. You'll have to find your own way. 2 years I'd lived with her after my William died at Gettysburg. 2 years of being a ghost in someone else's house. A burden. When the farm had a bad season, her husband made it clear. I had to go. So I took what little money I had and bought a ticket west, as far as it would take me. And this was it. Fort Kearny, the end of the line. Everyone here had a purpose. Soldiers marching, families loading wagons, kids running and laughing. Everyone had somewhere to go. Someone to be, everyone but me. I walked into the trading post, the smell of coffee and leather filling the air. The man behind the counter gave me a long look, saw the whole story in my single bag and my worn-out dress. Need to find work, I said, my voice trying so hard to be steady. He scratched his beard. Work's hard to come by for a woman alone. He didn't have to finish the sentence. I knew what he meant. No skills, no husband, no place. I was nothing. I left the store and sat on a bench by the water trough, the sun beating down on my head. I felt the world closing in, the panic rising in my chest. This was it. This was how I was going to disappear. Just fade away in a dusty fort where nobody knew my name. Then I heard hoofbeats. A man on a big bay horse rode into town. He sat tall in the saddle, his face shadowed by his hat. Behind him, 2 little children clung on, a boy and a girl, their faces pale and tired. He was a man of substance, you could tell. The horse was fine, his clothes were well made, even under the road dust. But there was a sadness about him, a deep, settled grief in his gray eyes. He looked like a man who'd seen the end of the world and had to keep walking anyway. He dismounted near me, his eyes landing on me for just a second. He saw it all, the loneliness, the desperation. He saw me. His little girl, Emma, maybe 6 years old, ran right up to me. "Are you waiting for someone?" she asked, her head tilted. Before I could answer, her father's voice cut in, sharp but not unkind. "Emma, come away from the lady." "She's not bothering me," I said, my voice barely a whisper. He walked over, taking off his hat. He looked to be in his 30s, with dark hair and those haunted gray eyes. "I apologize for my daughter, ma'am. I'm Jacob Brennan. These are my children, Emma and Daniel." "Catherine Morrison," I replied. He looked from my face to my single bag. He saw everything. And then he said the words that would change my life forever. "Mrs. Morrison," he said, his voice low and serious, "I'm going to speak plainly. You look like a woman who's run out of choices, and I'm a man with a problem." He paused, his eyes locking onto mine. "My children need a mother, and unless I'm mistaken, you need a home. I'm offering you a marriage." A marriage to a total stranger. It was insane. It was impossible. It was a deal made in desperation, a contract signed with despair. But what he didn't tell me, what he couldn't bring himself to say, was that he wasn't just offering me a home. He was offering me a dead woman's life, and I was desperate enough to take it. A wife! The word came out like a gasp of air. I felt the ground tilt under my feet. "Mr. Brennan, you don't know anything about me." "I know you're a widow," he said, his eyes never leaving mine. "I know you're alone. And I know you have kindness in you from how you spoke to my Emma." He sat down on the bench, leaving a respectable distance between us. "My wife, Mary, she's been gone 8 months, died in childbirth. I've been trying to manage the ranch and raise them alone, but it's not working. They need a woman's touch, someone to braid Emma's hair and help Daniel with his reading." The practical, straightforward way he spoke, it was like he was discussing a cattle purchase, not a marriage. "What about other aspects of marriage?" I whispered, my cheeks burning. "That would be up to you," he said, his gaze unflinching. "I'm not looking for a romance, Mrs. Morrison. I'm looking for a partner. A mother for my children. In return, you'd have security, a home, protection. It was a business arrangement, a cold, hard trade. My help for his name, my presence for his protection. It was a world away from the love letters William used to write me, full of poetry and dreams. But William's dreams were buried in a soldier's grave, and my reality was a dusty bench with nowhere to go. What choice did I have? Little Emma, who had been listening with wide eyes, suddenly took my hand. Her touch was warm and trusting. "You look sad, like Papa does," she said. "Mama used to say sad people need extra hugs and dancing to feel better." Her brother Daniel, older and more serious, spoke up for the first time. "Mama said families aren't just the people you're born with. Sometimes they're the people you choose to love." The words from these two motherless children hit me harder than any of their father's practical arguments. I looked at Jacob Brennan, at the hope and the exhaustion warring in his eyes. "Yes," I said, the words stronger than I felt. "Yes, I'll do it." A few hours later, we stood before the fort's preacher. The ceremony was simple, the words spoken without emotion. I was now Catherine Brennan, a wife, a mother, a complete stranger about to step into a dead woman's life. The next day, we rode out to his ranch. It was beautiful, nestled in a valley with a 2-story white farmhouse that looked like something out of a book. Red barns, grazing cattle, a creek winding through cottonwood trees. It was perfect, too perfect. "Mary designed it all," Jacob said, his voice thick with a reverence that made me feel like an intruder. "She drew the plans herself." As we pulled up, a tall, lean foreman with silver hair walked over. "Henry," Jacob said, "this is Catherine Brennan." Henry tipped his hat, his eyes kind but searching, like he was looking for something in my face. "Pleasure, ma'am. The young ones have been talking nonstop about their new mama." Emma grabbed my hand and pulled me inside, and that's when it hit me. The house, it wasn't just a house, it was a shrine. Everywhere I looked, it was Mary. Family photographs on the mantle, her handmade quilts on the chairs, her favorite blue vase with fresh wildflowers on the table. "Mama picked out all the colors," Emma said proudly. "She said a house should feel like a hug when you walk inside." But it didn't feel like a hug. It felt like I was suffocating. I was a ghost in another ghost's home. That night, after I tucked the children into beds Mary had made, I went to the master bedroom. Jacob had already moved my small trunk inside. My few simple dresses looked pathetic, hanging in the massive wardrobe next to Mary's beautiful clothes. On her side of the bed, on the nightstand, was a small, leather-bound diary. I knew I shouldn't. It was a violation, a desecration. But I couldn't stop myself. I needed to know the woman whose shoes I was supposed to fill. My hands trembled as I opened it. The entries were full of love for Jacob and the children, plans for the garden, notes about running the household. It was a portrait of a happy, contented life, until the last few entries. The handwriting grew frantic, spidery. The words were filled with fear. "He knows. He found out about the letters. He says I've betrayed him, that everything we built is a lie. I'm so afraid. Not for me, for the children." The very last entry, dated the day before she died, was just 3 words. "He's coming tonight." My blood ran cold. This wasn't a diary about a woman preparing for a new baby. This was the diary of a woman who believed she was about to be murdered. I slammed the book shut, my heart pounding. The official story was that Mary Brennan died in childbirth, a tragic but common fate on the frontier. But these words, they told a different story, and as I stood there in the silent bedroom, surrounded by Mary's things, a terrifying thought took root in my mind. Jacob Brennan hadn't just lost a wife, he had replaced her. I hid the diary, tucking it deep inside my trunk beneath my winter clothes. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Every shadow in the house seemed to stretch and twist. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like a footstep. I looked at Jacob, really looked at him, searching for a hint of the monster described in those frantic last pages. But all I saw was a grieving husband, a tired father. He was kind to me, gentle with the children. Was it all an act? A carefully constructed lie? He was a good man, wasn't he? I tried to push the diary from my mind. I focused on the children, on being the mother they needed. I baked bread. I helped Daniel with his reading. I learned to braid Emma's hair into two perfect plaits, just like she said her Mama Mary used to do. But Mary was always there, a silent, watchful presence in every room. Mama Mary says you're very nice, Emma told me one afternoon as we sat on the porch shelling peas. Oh, she does? I asked, trying to keep my voice light. Yes, Emma said, nodding seriously. She talks to me at night. She says she's happy we have you, but she also told me to be careful. A chill went down my spine. Careful of what, sweetheart? Emma's big blue eyes grew cloudy. She didn't say. She just said there are secrets in the ground. Secrets in the ground. What could that possibly mean? The foreman, Henry, was another mystery. He was always polite, always helpful, but I'd catch him watching me with this strange, pained expression. He'd been with the Brennans for years, helped Jacob build this very house. He had been devoted to Mary. I could see it in the way his eyes would linger on her photograph on the mantel. One evening I saw him standing by the small family plot at the edge of the property, where a single simple headstone marked Mary's grave. He was just standing there, his hat in his hands, his head bowed. He looked like a man haunted by more than just grief. He had to know something. Life fell into a rhythm, a tense, fragile rhythm. Days were filled with chores and children's laughter. Nights were filled with my own silent fear, sleeping in the bed next to a man who might be a killer. He never pushed for more than our arrangement. We were partners, sharing a house, sharing children, but not sharing a bed. Not really. The distance between us was a vast, empty prairie. Then came the wolves. A scream tore through the pre-dawn darkness. Not human. It was the terrified sound of cattle. Jacob was out of bed in an instant, grabbing his rifle. Stay with the children, he ordered, his face a grim mask in the moonlight. I ran to the children's rooms, gathering them into the parlor. Outside, shouts and rifle fire echoed across the valley. Daniel stood by the window, his small face rigid. Papa's out there, he whispered. He'll be all right, I said, pulling him away from the glass. Your papa is strong. But it felt wrong. The attack was too bold, too close to the house. It felt personal. When Jacob and Henry finally came back, exhausted and covered in grime as the sun rose, they confirmed my fears. The fence was cut, Jacob said, his voice tight with fury. Clean through. This wasn't just a pack of hungry wolves. Someone drove them into our pasture. My mind immediately flashed to the diary. He knows. He's coming tonight. Had someone come back to finish a job? To destroy what was left of Mary's life? A few days later, I was mending one of Daniel's shirts on the porch when I saw him. Daniel. He was sitting under the big cottonwood tree by the creek, his whittling knife in his hand. He was a talented carver, a quiet boy who expressed himself through his little wooden figures. He was carving a man, a tall man in a hat, and a woman lying on the ground at the man's feet. My breath caught in my throat. I walked over to him, my heart pounding. Daniel, that's very good, I said, my voice shaking. Who is it? He didn't look up. He just kept shaving tiny curls of wood from the figure of the man. It's the angry man, he whispered. The angry man? I prompted gently. Did you see him here, at the ranch? Daniel finally looked up at me, his eyes filled with a terror that was far too old for his 8 years. He was in Mama's room, Daniel said, his voice so low I could barely hear it. The night the baby went to heaven, he was yelling, and Mama! Mama fell down. My blood turned to ice. It wasn't a childbirth complication. It was a fall, during an argument, with an angry man. Daniel, I whispered, kneeling in front of him. Was the angry man, was it Papa? He shook his head frantically, his eyes wide with fear. No, not Papa. Papa was in the barn. It was the other man, the one Mama called her mistake. Before I could ask anything else, we heard horses approaching. Riding towards the house were 3 men, and the man in the lead, handsome and smiling with cold, dead eyes, was a stranger to me. But I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that I was looking at the carved figure from Daniel's hands. Jacob came out onto the porch, his body going rigid. Robert Caldwell, he bit out, his voice full of venom. What the hell do you want? Caldwell swung down from his horse, his smile never reaching his eyes. He looked past Jacob, his gaze landing on me. Well, Jacob, he said, his voice smooth as poison, I've just come to meet the new Mrs. Brennan and to take back what's rightfully mine. He wasn't looking at the ranch. He was looking at the children. Robert Caldwell. The name meant nothing to me, but the look on Jacob's face said everything. This was more than an unwelcome visitor. This was an enemy. These children are Mary's, Caldwell said, his voice carrying across the yard. And as her former fiancé, and a man of some standing, I'm concerned about their welfare. He gestured to the two men with him. One wore a sheriff's badge, the other had the stiff look of a lawyer. You have no claim here, Caldwell, Jacob growled, moving to stand slightly in front of me and the children. Don't I? Caldwell's smile was predatory. Mary and I had an understanding. We were business partners. She was going to leave you, Jacob. We were going to raise her children together. A lie, it had to be a lie. Mary's diary was filled with love for Jacob. But then I remembered the last entries, the fear, the betrayal. Had Caldwell twisted the truth, or had Mary been living a double life? The man in the suit, a Judge Harwick, stepped forward. Mr. Brennan, Mr. Caldwell has filed a petition with the territorial court. He's seeking guardianship of Emma and Daniel Brennan. The world spun. This couldn't be happening. On what grounds? I found my voice, my hand finding Daniel's and squeezing it tight. On the grounds that this marriage is a sham, Caldwell said, his eyes glinting. Everyone knows you hired this woman, a destitute widow cast out by her own family, to be a glorified housekeeper. Is that a fit environment for my dear Mary's children? The cruelty of his words, the way he twisted my desperation into a weapon, it stole the air from my lungs. Miss Catherine is our mama, Emma shouted, her little voice fierce. Caldwell crouched down, his face a mask of false sympathy. Is she, little one? Or is she just a stranger your papa brought here to do the chores? That's enough! Jacob's voice was a thunderclap. Get off my land. This will be settled by the law, Judge Harwick said calmly. I'll be returning in 1 week with my decision. They rode away, leaving a cloud of dust and a silence thick with dread. That night, the house felt like a tomb. Jacob paced the parlor like a caged animal. We could run, he said, his voice ragged. Take the children to Oregon, start over. And live like fugitives, I asked. No, Jacob, this is your home. We have to fight. But how? It was his word against a respected man with the law on his side. Caldwell's story of a sham marriage. It was close enough to the truth to be dangerous. We had been careful, respectful partners, but we hadn't been a husband and a wife in love. To the outside world, it could easily look like a cold business deal. Late that night, there was a knock at the door. It was Henry, the foreman, along with 3 other ranchers from neighboring properties. We heard what happened, Henry said, his face grim. Caldwell's been sniffing around for weeks, spreading poison, asking questions. Another rancher, Tom Wilson, spoke up. He came by my place asking if I thought your marriage was real. I told him to go to hell, begging your pardon, ma'am. Any fool with eyes can see how you are with those children. My heart swelled. We weren't as alone as I thought. We'll sign a petition, Henry said. The whole territory. We'll tell the judge what we see. A real family. He paused, looking from me to Jacob. But there's more. The rumors he's spreading, that your marriage isn't real in all ways, that you sleep in separate rooms. My face burned. He was right. That was the crack in our defense, the part of the lie that was true. After they left, Jacob and I stood in the silent kitchen. The unspoken truth hung in the air between us. Catherine, he began, his voice hesitant, to fight this, we need to be a family. Not just for show, but for real. He was saying what I had been feeling for weeks. This arrangement, born of desperation, had become something more. I had fallen in love with his children, and somewhere along the way, I had fallen in love with him too. The quiet, steady man who was trying so hard to hold his world together. I know, I whispered. He stepped closer, his gray eyes searching mine. This has become more than a partnership for me, Catherine. He reached out and gently touched my cheek. It was the first time he had ever touched me with anything other than polite consideration. A jolt went through me, warm and real. "I love you," he said, the words raw and honest. Tears streamed down my face. "I love you too." He pulled me into his arms, and when he kissed me, it wasn't the kiss of a stranger or a business partner. It was the kiss of a husband. My husband. In that moment, we weren't just fighting for the children and the ranch. We were fighting for us. The next day, I was cleaning out the fireplace, preparing to light a morning fire, when my hand brushed against a loose stone in the hearth. Curiosity piqued, I worked it free. Behind it was a small, hollow space, and inside that space was a small, tin box. My hands trembled as I opened it. It was filled with letters, letters written in Mary's elegant script. But they weren't addressed to Jacob. They were addressed to Henry. I sank to the floor, reading letter after letter. They were love letters. Passionate, secret, desperate letters. Mary hadn't been in love with Jacob. Not for a long time. She had been in love with their foreman. The last letter was written on the day she died. "My dearest Henry, Caldwell found out about us. He knows everything. He is using it to blackmail me. He has some kind of hold over the deed to this ranch. Some business dealing I never understood. He says if I don't leave Jacob and convince him to sign over the land, he will ruin us all. He's coming tonight to force my hand. I am so scared. If anything happens to me, you must protect my children. Protect them from him and from Jacob, who must never know the truth of my betrayal." It all clicked into place. The fear in the diary, Daniel seeing Caldwell in her room, Henry's haunted grief. Caldwell wasn't just an ex-fiancé. He was a blackmailer. He had been trying to steal the ranch. Mary's death hadn't been an accident, and it hadn't been at Jacob's hand. Caldwell had murdered her. And now he was coming back to finish the job, using the law to steal the last thing Mary had loved, her children. The truth was a fire in my veins. I ran, letters in hand, to find Jacob. He was in the barn, his face a storm cloud as he sharpened an axe. "Jacob, you have to see this," I panted, holding out the tin box. He read the letters, his face growing paler with each word. The story of his wife's secret love for another man, the story of her betrayal. It was a brutal blow. But beneath the pain, I saw the anger shift, refocus. It was no longer a desperate fury at the world. It was the cold, sharp rage of a man who finally knew his enemy's name. "All this time," he whispered. "All this time," I thought. I blamed myself, that maybe I hadn't been enough for her. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a new, terrible clarity. "She wasn't afraid of me, Catherine. She was trying to protect me, and the children, from him." We found Henry by the creek, skipping stones with Daniel. We showed him the letters. The strong, silent man broke down, his shoulders shaking with a grief he had held inside for almost a year. "I should have known," he sobbed. "I saw his wagon ride away that night, long after he should have been gone. I heard them arguing. When I found her, Jacob had just come in from the barn. The doctor said it was the childbirth that she'd fallen." I thought. I was so twisted up with grief and jealousy. I suspected Jacob. "You protected my children," Jacob said, his voice thick with emotion as he put a hand on Henry's shoulder. "That's all that matters now. We had the truth. But what good was it? A dead woman's letters against a powerful man like Caldwell. The judge would see it as a sordid affair, proof that the Brennan household was indeed unstable. It could backfire horribly. Caldwell had some kind of legal claim on the land. That was his leverage. We had to find it. We spent the next 2 days tearing the house apart. We searched Mary's desk, Jacob's ledgers, every book and every file. Nothing. It was like Caldwell's involvement had been scrubbed from existence. The day before the judge was due to return, I was sitting in the parlor, defeated. My gaze fell on the sampler Mary had stitched, hanging over the mantelpiece. It was a beautiful piece of work, with the alphabet and a verse about home and family. But something was wrong. The stitching on the back, around the wooden frame, it was newer, looser. My fingers fumbled as I pried the fabric away from the frame. Tucked inside, taped to the wood, was a folded document. It was a deed, a revised deed to the Brennan Ranch. It was a complex partnership agreement between Mary Brennan and Robert Caldwell. It stated that in the event of Mary's death, or if the ranch was deemed to be managed by a household without a fit and proper maternal figure, full control of the property and all its assets, including guardianship of any heirs, would revert to the surviving partner, Robert Caldwell. It was a trap designed from the start. He had been coercing her, using her affair with Henry as leverage to force her into this business deal. He hadn't needed to kill her. He just needed her out of the way. He could have driven her to leave or waited for her to die in childbirth. But she must have fought back that night. She must have threatened to expose him. So he killed her and made it look like an accident. And now he was using this wicked, twisted document to finish his theft. He was using the law to legalize a murder. He's going to win, I whispered, the papers shaking in my hand. Jacob, he's going to take the children. Jacob took the deed, his face ashen. He had built this ranch with his own 2 hands. It was his life's work, his legacy for his children, and it was all about to be stolen by the man who had murdered his wife. That night, as a storm rolled in across the plains, an idea began to form in my mind. A desperate, dangerous idea. We couldn't fight Caldwell with the truth. The truth was too messy, too easy to twist. So we had to fight him with a lie, a better lie. I found my old carpet bag, the one I'd arrived with. Inside, wrapped in cloth, were the letters from my William, his beautiful words, his promises of a future we never got to have, my only link to the life I had lost. I took out the last letter he ever wrote me, and with a steady hand, I began to work. I spent hours by candlelight, carefully, painstakingly altering the letter. It was a terrible thing to do, to desecrate the memory of my dear William. But I wasn't that person anymore. I wasn't the helpless widow. I was Catherine Brennan, a wife, a mother, and I would burn down the world to protect my family. The next morning, when Judge Harwick's carriage appeared on the horizon, I was ready. He wasn't alone. Behind him came wagons and riders. The whole community was coming. Henry and the other ranchers had done their work. They were here to bear witness. Caldwell rode at the front, a smug, triumphant look on his face. He thought he had already won. He had the law, the documents, the power. What he didn't know was that I had a story, and my story was better than his. The yard filled with our neighbors. They stood in a silent, stubborn crowd, a wall of support around our little family. Martha Wilson, Tom's wife, strode up to the porch and handed Judge Harwick a thick sheaf of papers. "The petition," she said firmly. 43 families vouching for Catherine Brennan. The judge looked overwhelmed, but Caldwell just sneered. "A popularity contest is not a legal proceeding, Your Honor." He produced his own document with a flourish. The deed. "This is what matters. A binding contract that grants me authority over this property and the welfare of its heirs in the absence of their mother." The judge read the deed, his face growing grim. I could see it in his eyes. The legal language was ironclad. We were losing. Jacob's hand found mine, his grip crushingly tight. I saw the despair in his eyes, the look of a man about to lose everything. This was it. My moment. "Judge Harwick," I said, my voice ringing out, clear and steady. "Mr. Caldwell's entire claim is based on the idea that I'm an unsuitable mother, a stranger who tricked her way into this family. Your origins are irregular," the judge conceded. "That's true," I said, looking not at the judge, but at the crowd of faces watching me. "I came here with nothing, a desperate widow, and Jacob Brennan made me a practical offer. That is the story you all know." I paused, letting the silence hang in the air. But it's not the whole story. I reached into my dress pocket and pulled out the letter. William's letter. My forgery. My desperate, beautiful lie. My late husband, Captain William Morrison, died at Gettysburg. He was a hero, but he was also a quiet, observant man. In the months before he went to war, he was stationed in Omaha, working for the Army as a logistics officer, overseeing supply contracts for the territories. I could feel every eye on me. Jacob looked at me, his expression a mixture of confusion and dawning hope. "William wasn't just a soldier," I continued, my voice gaining strength. "He uncovered a pattern of fraud, land speculation, price gouging, all run by a very prominent businessman. A man who was getting rich by cheating the Army and the settlers trying to make a life out here. William was collecting evidence. He was going to expose him. I held up the letter. This was the last letter he ever sent me. He told me he had the final piece of proof. He told me the man's name. I looked directly at Robert Caldwell. His smug smile had vanished. His face was a mask of disbelief and panic. The man my husband was investigating was Robert Caldwell. A gasp went through the crowd. "This is absurd," Caldwell blustered. "She's making this up. It's the desperate fantasy of a woman about to be thrown back out on the street." "Is it?" I asked calmly. "This letter contains details of Mr. Caldwell's fraudulent dealings. Names, dates, shipment numbers. My husband sent it to me for safekeeping, in case something happened to him. And something did. He died in battle just days later. A hero. And Mr. Caldwell's secrets died with him." I handed the letter to the judge. He read it, his eyebrows shooting up. The details I had invented, gleaned from old newspapers and Jacob's ledgers, were plausible, convincing. "After my husband's death," I went on, the story pouring out of me, "I was lost. My family turned me away. I had nothing. But I had my husband's last letter, and I had a mission, to finish what he started, to see that Robert Caldwell was brought to justice." "So you came here?" the judge asked, completely engrossed. "Yes, I came west. I didn't know how I would do it, only that I had to. By some miracle of fate, I ended up here, in Fort Kearny. And I met Jacob Brennan, a good, honorable man being tormented by this very same villain. I turned to Jacob, my eyes pleading with him to understand, to follow my lead. Our marriage, it wasn't just a practical arrangement. It was an alliance, a partnership to protect this family and this land from a man who would stop at nothing to get it." The crowd was murmuring, the tide of opinion turning so fast it was like a physical force. They were no longer just supporting a neighbor. They were witnessing a tale of justice, of a widow's quest to honor her fallen hero husband. Caldwell was sweating now, his eyes darting around like a trapped rat. "She's lying. Search her things. There's no other proof." "Oh, but there is," I said, playing my final card. "My husband told me he hid his ledger, the book with all the original evidence, somewhere safe. He said he entrusted it to the one person in this territory he knew he could trust completely, an old Army colleague, a man of unimpeachable honor." I turned and looked at the crowd, my eyes scanning the faces until I found him. "Sheriff Miller," I said, "my husband, Captain Morrison, said he gave the ledger to you." The sheriff, who had been standing awkwardly beside the judge, looked utterly baffled. His mouth opened and closed. He was a good man, but he was in over his head. Caldwell had bought his cooperation, but his loyalty was to the community. I was counting on that. I was counting on him to see the truth in the lie. All eyes went to the sheriff. Caldwell's face was a mess of terror. He knew, as I knew, that there was no ledger. But in this moment, the sheriff's word was all that mattered. The sheriff looked at me, at my earnest, pleading face. He looked at Jacob, standing strong and ready to fight. He looked at the two small children hiding behind my skirts. And then he looked at Robert Caldwell, a man he now clearly saw as a predator and a cheat. He drew himself up to his full height. "Yes, ma'am," the sheriff said, his voice booming across the yard. "I remember Captain Morrison. A fine man. He did give me a book for safekeeping." He turned to the judge, his face hard as stone. "I have it locked in my office safe." It was over. The lie had become truth. Caldwell let out a strangled cry. He knew the sheriff was calling his bluff. He knew that if they went back to town, a ledger would be found. His life was over. In a single, fluid motion, he drew a pistol from his coat. He lunged across the porch and grabbed Emma, pulling her in front of him as a shield. "Stay back!" he screamed, his eyes wild with panic. "Everyone, stay back!" The crowd screamed. Jacob roared with rage. But before anyone could move, a blur of motion came from the side of the porch. It was Daniel. My quiet, gentle Daniel. His face transformed into a mask of pure, protective fury. In his hand was his whittling knife. He didn't hesitate. He drove the small, sharp blade deep into Caldwell's thigh. Caldwell howled in pain, his grip on Emma loosening for just a second. It was all the opening Henry needed. He launched himself at Caldwell, hitting him like a freight train and sending them both tumbling off the porch. The gun went flying. It was chaos. The men of the community swarmed Caldwell, pinning him to the ground. The sheriff had his own gun out now, restoring order. I snatched Emma into my arms, holding her tight, while Jacob grabbed Daniel, holding his son who was trembling, not with fear, but with the aftermath of a courage I never knew he possessed. I looked at my family, my husband, my son, my daughter, bruised and terrified but together, whole. Robert Caldwell was dragged away in chains, his threats and curses swallowed by the wind. The judge, looking shaken, simply tipped his hat to me. "Mrs. Brennan," he said, "it appears justice has been served." As our neighbors surrounded us with words of comfort and praise, I knew the truth. Justice hadn't been served, it had been made, forged in a crucible of desperation and love. My name was Catherine Brennan, and my story was just beginning. Months later, spring had come to the valley. The world was alive with color and the promise of new beginnings. The dark cloud of Robert Caldwell was gone, his fraudulent empire collapsing after the sheriff miraculously found a ledger detailing years of criminal activity. The lie I told had settled into legend, a story whispered around campfires in the territory, the story of the brave widow who brought down a villain. Sometimes I felt a pang of guilt for desecrating William's memory. But then I would look at my family and I knew I would do it all again. Our house was no longer a shrine to a ghost. It was a home, filled with laughter and the smell of baking bread. My things mingled with Mary's. We made space for the past, but we didn't live in it. Jacob and I, we were no longer partners in an arrangement. We were husband and wife. The love that had grown in the shadow of fear now bloomed in the open sunlight. One afternoon I was on the porch watching Emma teach a new calf to take milk from a bucket. Daniel was beside me, carefully carving a small wooden bird. His hands, which had once saved his sister, were now creating something beautiful. Jacob came and sat beside me, slipping his arm around my shoulders. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. "I'm thinking," I said, leaning my head against his shoulder, "that my sister once told me I would have to find my own way." I looked out at the sprawling green land, at the two beautiful children who called me mother, at the strong, kind man beside me. I think I finally have. My journey started at the end of the line, a place where my old life had died. But I was wrong. It wasn't the end. It was the beginning. I had been given a second chance at life, a second chance at love, in the last place I ever expected to find it. I had found my way. I had found my home. If you enjoyed Catherine's story and want to hear more tales of survival, mystery, and the hidden corners of history, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. And don't forget to turn on notifications so you don't miss our next story. Thanks for listening.